Imagine this, you're 24 weeks pregnant, in the middle of a magical ultrasound moment with your millionaire husband of 12 years. When his phone buzzes with a text that shatters everything, can't wait for our Aspen weekend while she's fat and clueless. What if your perfect life Malibu mansion, tech mogul spouse, devoted family was all a facade built on lies, affairs, hidden millions, and twists that go way deeper than infidelity? In Shattered Vows, join Sophia Reynolds on a roller coaster of betrayal, revenge, and rebirth. From heartbreaking discoveries to jaw-dropping secrets that will have you questioning everyone. You won't believe the final twists. Stick around for the full story that inspired thousands. If this hooks you, smash that like button, drop a comment on what you do in Sophia's shoes, share with a friend who loves drama, and subscribe for more epic tales like this. Let's dive in. The steady thrum of the ultrasound machine filled the pristine Beverly Hills medical office as Sophia Reynolds watched her unborn daughter's tiny heart flutter on the monitor. At 24 weeks pregnant, this should have been one of those magical moments she would treasure forever. Instead, her hands trembled as she stared at Richard's phone, which had buzzed with a text message while he stepped out to take what he called an urgent business call. The message from someone, saved as simply E, made her blood turn to ice. Can't wait for our Aspen weekend while she's fat and clueless. You promised we'd tell her after the baby comes. I'm tired of hiding. Dr. Martinez continued her cheerful commentary about the baby's development, but Sophia's world had just shattered as completely as crystal hitting marble. Her millionaire husband of 12 years, the man who had just been holding her hand and calling their daughter Daddy's little princess, was having an affair. Mrs. Reynolds, are you feeling all right? Your blood pressure seems elevated, Dr. Martinez said, concern creeping into her voice. Sophia forced herself to breathe, to focus on the whooshing sound of her baby's heartbeat. This tiny life inside her deserved a mother who could hold it together, even when her husband was betraying them both in the most devastating way possible. I'm fine, she whispered, though nothing would ever be fine again. When Richard returned, his expression was carefully neutral, but Sophia noticed things she had somehow missed before. The way he kept his phone face down, the guilt that flickered across his features when he looked at her growing belly, the expensive cologne that wasn't the brand she had bought him for Christmas. They drove home to their Malibu mansion in tense silence, the Pacific Coast Highway stretching endlessly before them. Sophia clutched the ultrasound photos while Richard made small talk about the baby's nursery, his voice hollow and performative. Every word felt like another lie layered on top of years of deception. The moment they stepped through the front door of their $6 million home, Sophia couldn't contain it anymore. The pregnancy hormones, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of his lies, it all exploded out of her at once. Who is E? She demanded, holding up his phone. Richard's face went white. For a split second, she saw the real him, not the charming tech CEO who graced magazine covers, but a man caught in a web of his own making. Sophia, I can explain. Explain what, that you're cheating on your pregnant wife? That you're planning romantic getaways while I'm carrying your child? It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. Her voice cracked, years of suppressed doubt suddenly crystallizing into devastating clarity. How long, Richard? How long have you been lying to me? He ran his hands through his salt and pepper hair, the gesture she had once found endearing, now seeming calculated and false. Sophia, please, think about the baby. This stress isn't good for either of you. The audacity of using her pregnancy as a shield for his infidelity made something snap inside her. Don't you dare use our baby as an excuse for your betrayal. Don't you dare. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The company, the investors. So you decided to find comfort with another woman. Sophia's voice rose to a pitch she barely recognized. While I gave up my career to support your dreams, while I've been nothing but devoted to this family, Richard's mask finally slipped completely. Maybe if you hadn't let yourself go, if you weren't always tired and complaining. The words hit her like physical blows. After 2 difficult pregnancies, after 12 years of putting his needs first, after sacrificing her own marketing career to be the perfect wife, this was how he saw her. "Get out," she whispered. "This is my house. Get out." In his rage, Richard grabbed the nearest object, a crystal vase that had been a wedding gift from his mother, and hurled it in Sophia's direction. She ducked instinctively, protecting her belly, and the vase sailed past her to shatter against the white marble wall, sending glittering fragments across their perfect living room. The sound of breaking glass seemed to echo forever. Sophia stood frozen, one hand on her pregnant stomach, staring at the destruction. In that moment, she realized that the vase wasn't the only thing that had shattered. Her marriage, her trust, her entire life had just exploded into 1,000 irreparable pieces. "I didn't mean," Richard started, but the sound of sirens cut him off. Their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had apparently heard the shouting and called the police. Within minutes, 2 officers were at their door, taking statements and photographing the broken glass, while Sophia tried to explain that she wasn't hurt, just heartbroken. As Richard was led away for questioning about domestic disturbance, he turned back to her one last time. "Sophia, I never meant for it to happen this way." But it was too late for apologies. As the police car pulled away from their circular driveway, Sophia sank into the white leather sofa she had carefully selected 3 years ago, when they had remodeled the house for their growing family. Now it felt like a museum of a marriage that had never really existed. That night, alone in their master bedroom, Sophia lay listening to the rain pound against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The storm outside seemed to mirror the tempest in her heart. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling her daughter's gentle movements, and made a silent promise that she would protect this child from the wreckage of her parents' marriage. But as she reached into Richard's nightstand to find something to help her sleep, her fingers closed around something that made her blood run cold, a credit card statement she had never seen before, with charges totaling over $200,000. Tiffany jewelry, a penthouse apartment lease, luxury spa treatments, all for someone named Elena Martinez. The affair wasn't just emotional. Richard had been funding another woman's entire lifestyle with their marital assets. The betrayal ran deeper than she had imagined, and Sophia realized this was only the beginning of discovering how thoroughly her husband had deceived her. As lightning illuminated the room, Sophia clutched the statement to her chest and began to plan. If Richard thought she was just a naive housewife who would quietly accept his infidelity, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. Her marriage might be over, but Sophia Reynolds was just getting started. The morning after Richard's arrest, Sophia woke to find her story splashed across the gossip blogs. Tech mogul, Richard Reynolds arrested after domestic dispute with pregnant wife, screamed the headline on page 6, complete with a photo of their Malibu mansion and speculation about trouble in their picture-perfect marriage. Sophia's best friend Grace Chen arrived before Sophia had even finished her first cup of decaf coffee, armed with bagels from their favorite Beverly Hills bakery and the kind of fierce loyalty that had sustained their friendship since college. "I brought reinforcements," Grace announced, settling her petite frame into the breakfast nook that overlooked the Pacific. As a licensed therapist specializing in women's trauma, Grace had seen plenty of marriages implode, but watching it happen to her closest friend was different. "The whole world knows now," Sophia said, scrolling through her phone with mounting horror. The comments were brutal, some supporting her, others suggesting she had driven her husband to cheat through her own inadequacies. "Let them talk," Grace said firmly. "Right now, we focus on protecting you and the baby. Tell me everything." As Sophia recounted the events of the previous day, Grace took notes with the clinical precision that had made her one of LA's most sought-after therapists. When Sophia showed her the credit card statement, Grace's expression darkened. "This Elena Martinez, do you know anything about her? I think she might work for Richard's company. The name sounds familiar, but I can't place her." Sophia rubbed her temples, fighting the pregnancy headache that had been building since dawn. "Grace, what if I've been blind to this for years? What if everyone knew but me?" Stop, Grace said, reaching across the table to squeeze Sophia's hand. This is not your fault. Repeat after me. This is not my fault. This is not my fault, Sophia whispered, though she didn't quite believe it yet. We need to hire a private investigator, Grace continued, and a divorce attorney, someone who specializes in high net worth cases and isn't intimidated by Richard's connections. By afternoon, they were sitting in the downtown office of Maria Santos, an attorney whose reputation for dismantling wealthy men's carefully constructed financial empires was legendary in Los Angeles legal circles. Santos was a woman who had clawed her way to the top of a male-dominated profession, and she looked at Sophia with the kind of understanding that came from seeing too many similar cases. The first thing we need to establish is the scope of marital assets, Santos explained, spreading documents across her glass desk. Your husband's company went public 3 years ago. Correct? That means his net worth has likely tripled since your last prenuptial agreement was signed. Sophia's heart sank. The prenup, does that mean I get nothing? Not necessarily. California is a community property state, and if we can prove marital funds were used to support this affair, we may be able to challenge the agreement's terms. Santos leaned forward. But I won't lie to you, Mrs. Reynolds. Men like your husband don't accumulate $50 million without learning how to protect it. As they left the lawyer's office, Sophia felt the weight of the battle ahead. This wasn't just about money, it was about ensuring her children's future and holding Richard accountable for his betrayal. That evening, while 10-year-old Marcus was at soccer practice, Richard returned home. He looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance rumpled from a night in jail and a day of crisis management with his PR team. Sophia, please, we need to talk. Against her better judgment, she let him in. He moved through their home like a stranger, touching familiar objects as if trying to ground himself in a reality that had shifted overnight. I ended it, he said without preamble. Elena and it's over. I told her this morning. For a moment, Sophia felt a flutter of hope. Maybe they could fix this. Maybe their family could survive intact. I've scheduled us an appointment with Dr. Morrison for couples therapy, Richard continued. We can work through this. Sophia, for Marcus, for the baby. We can't let one mistake destroy 12 years of marriage. One mistake? Sophia's voice was dangerously quiet. Richard, you spent $200,000 on another woman. You bought her jewelry, paid for her apartment. That's not a mistake, that's a double life. The money doesn't matter. I can make more. What matters is us, our family. He approached her cautiously, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. I know I hurt you, but we can get past this. We have to. Looking at his face, the face she had loved for over a decade, Sophia wanted desperately to believe him. The alternative was single motherhood, a custody battle, and rebuilding her entire life from scratch at 38. You have to understand, she said slowly. Trust isn't something you can just repair with therapy sessions and promises. You looked me in the eye every day for 2 years while you were with her. You came home to me after being with her. How do I ever believe anything you say again? Because I love you, he said simply. Because despite everything, what we have is real. Elena was just what? Just sex. Just emotional support. Just everything you weren't getting from your pregnant wife. Richard flinched. It wasn't about you. You have to believe that. It was about me, about feeling young again, about the pressure of the company. So when the pressure gets too much in the future, you'll find another Elena. No, never. I swear to you, Sophia, it will never happen again. That night, as Richard slept in the guest room per her ultimatum, Sophia found herself remembering their early days together, how he had pursued her relentlessly when she was a rising star at a competing marketing firm, how he had promised her the world if she would just trust him with her heart. Maybe Grace was right about giving people second chances. Maybe their marriage was worth fighting for. But at 3 a.m, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ask your husband about the baby. Sophia stared at the message, her blood turning to ice. What baby? Elena's baby. She crept downstairs and called the number, her hands shaking as it rang. Hello. A woman's voice, sleepy and confused. Who is this? This is Elena. Who is this? The world tilted on its axis. This is Sophia Reynolds, Richard's wife. A long pause and then, oh, God, Mrs. Reynolds. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Richard promised he would tell you about us after your baby was born, but I couldn't wait any longer. Not when we're both pregnant? The phone slipped from Sophia's fingers, clattering to the marble floor. Elena Martinez wasn't just Richard's mistress. She was pregnant too. And based on the timeline, she had gotten pregnant before Sophia, which meant the affair had been going on much longer than Richard had admitted. As Sophia sat on her kitchen floor in the dark, surrounded by the wreckage of every lie her husband had told her, she realized that the betrayal was far deeper than she had imagined. Her marriage wasn't just broken, it had been built on a foundation of deception from the very beginning. The next morning brought no relief from the nightmare Sophia's life had become. She woke up nauseous, not from morning sickness, but from the devastating revelation that her husband's mistress was also carrying his child. As she stood in their marble bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror that had once shown her a confident, happy wife, she saw a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, and utterly lost. Richard had already left for an early meeting, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and a note promising they would talk tonight. The casual normalcy of it made Sophia want to scream. Grace arrived within an hour of Sophia's panicked phone call, finding her friend sitting motionless in the breakfast nook, staring out at the ocean as if it held answers to questions she was afraid to ask. Elena Martinez is 7 months pregnant, Sophia said without preamble. 7 months. Grace, do you know what that means? Grace sank into the chair across from her, the implications hitting her like a physical blow. The fertility treatments. You were struggling to conceive when Richard was getting another woman pregnant, while I was taking hormones and enduring procedures and blaming myself for not being able to give him another child, he was creating one with his mistress. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. During those dark months when Sophia had questioned her worth as a woman because she couldn't seem to get pregnant again, Richard had been proof that the problem wasn't his fertility, it was just that he was sharing it with someone else. I need to see her, Sophia said suddenly. That's not a good idea. I need to see the woman who's been living off my money, sleeping with my husband, and carrying his child while I struggled with infertility. Before Grace could stop her, Sophia was dialing the private investigator Maria Sanos had recommended. Within 2 hours, she had Elena Martinez's address, workplace, and a detailed background report that made her stomach churn. Elena Martinez, 29 years old, had been Richard's personal assistant for 3 years. She had replaced Sophia's former position at Reynolds Tech, the job Sophia had left when Marcus was born, because Richard had convinced her that their family needed her at home more than the company needed her expertise. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. Richard had literally replaced her with a younger model, both professionally and personally. She's been receiving a separate salary as Richard's personal assistant, plus another payment listed as consulting fees. The investigator explained over the phone. The apartment lease, the car, the credit cards, it's all been paid for through a shell company registered to your husband's business. That afternoon, against Grace's protests and her lawyer's advice, Sophia drove to Elena's Beverly Hills apartment building. She needed to see the life her marriage had funded, needed to understand what had been worth destroying their family. The building was sleek and modern, the kind of place that screamed expensive even from the street. Sophia parked her Range Rover and stared up at the windows, wondering which one belonged to the woman who had unknowingly been sharing her husband for 2 years. She was still sitting there, gathering courage, when a familiar figure emerged from the building's underground garage. Elena Martinez was smaller than Sophia had expected, with glossy dark hair and the kind of effortless style that came with having someone else pay for your wardrobe. Her pregnancy was obvious but carried differently than Sophia's, like a badge of victory rather than a burden of worry. Elena walked directly to Sophia's car and tapped on the window. Mrs. Reynolds, I'm Elena. I think we should talk. They ended up at a small cafe down the street, sitting across from each other like adversaries negotiating a ceasefire. Up close, Elena was even younger looking than her 29 years, with the kind of dewy skin that hadn't yet been touched by the stress of real responsibility. I want you to know I never meant for it to happen this way, Elena began, her voice soft but confident. Richard told me you two were having problems, that you were more like roommates than a married couple. And you believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was so unhappy. Mrs. Reynolds, he said you hadn't been intimate in over a year, that you were focused on everything except your marriage. Each word was like a scalpel, cutting into Sophia's already wounded heart. Did he mention that I was struggling with fertility treatments, that I was exhausted and hormonal and desperate to give him another child? Elena's confidence faltered slightly. He said you didn't want more children, that you were done with that phase of your life. I was going through IVF when you got pregnant with his baby. The color drained from Elena's face. I didn't know. Richard never said. Richard says a lot of things. The question is, why should I believe you didn't know you were destroying a family? Elena's hand moved protectively to her belly. Because I love him, and he loves me. Mrs. Reynolds, I'm not proud of how this started, but Richard and we have something real. He's going to leave you after your baby is born. We're going to be a family, all of us together. The casual way she said it, as if Sophia's life was just an obstacle to be cleared away, made something inside Sophia snap. You're living in a fantasy world if you think Richard Reynolds leaves his wife for his mistress. Do you have any idea what a divorce would cost him? Money isn't everything. To Richard it is. It always has been. Sophia leaned forward, her voice deadly quiet. You're not the first, Elena. You won't be the last. You're just the first one stupid enough to get pregnant and think it makes you special. That's not true. Richard loves me. He's going to marry me. Richard loves Richard. Everything else is just props in the performance of his life. But even as she said it, Sophia could see that Elena truly believed what she was saying. The girl in she was still a girl. Despite being nearly 30, had built her entire identity around being chosen by Richard Reynolds. The truth would destroy her, but it needed to be said. How long do you think this has been going on? Sophia asked. 2 years. Try 4. I found emails on his laptop from 2019. Elena, before you ever worked for the company, Richard has been systematically cheating throughout our entire marriage. You're just the latest in a long line of women who thought they were special. Elena's face crumpled. You're lying. I have proof. Hotel receipts, credit card statements, deleted text messages that my investigator recovered. You want to see them? No. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I don't believe you. Then you're going to learn the hard way what I learned yesterday. Richard Reynolds is incapable of fidelity. The only difference between you and me is that I was stupid enough to marry him. As Sophia drove home, she felt no satisfaction in Elena's tears. The girl was as much a victim of Richard's manipulation as she was just younger and more naive about it. But that evening, when Richard came home with flowers and apologies, Sophia was done playing the understanding wife. I met Elena today. Richard went very still. Sophia, she's 7 months pregnant. 7 months. Richard, which means you got her pregnant while I was going through fertility treatments. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. And it's worse than what I think, because Elena seems to believe you're going to leave me for her after our baby is born. Richard's face cycled through emotions, guilt, anger, calculation. I never promised her that. So you just let her believe it while you funded her entire lifestyle with our money. I was going to end it. When after she had your baby, after I had your baby, when exactly were you planning to clean up the mess you've made of all our lives? Richard ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as his tell when he was calculating his next lie. I know how this looks, but you have to understand. I understand perfectly. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too. A devoted wife at home and a young mistress on the side. You funded Elena's pregnancy while I struggled with infertility, and you were planning to keep us both strung along indefinitely. That's not, it's over, Richard. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. You can't do that. Think about Marcus. Think about the baby. I am thinking about them. I'm thinking about the kind of man I want them to see as their father. And right now, you don't qualify. That night, as Sophia lay in bed listening to Richard pack a bag in the guest room, her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. I found the emails you mentioned. You were right. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Reynolds, for everything. But Sophia's relief at Elena's realization was short-lived. The next message made her blood run cold. There's something else you need to know. Richard has been moving money offshore for months. He's planning to hide assets before the divorce. I have recordings of him talking about it with his lawyer. As Sophia stared at the message, she realized that Richard's betrayal went far beyond infidelity. He had been systematically planning to financially destroy her long before she ever discovered the affair. The man she had loved and trusted for 12 years wasn't just a cheater. He was a calculating predator who had been setting her up to lose everything while he started fresh with a younger woman. But Richard had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated both of the women he had betrayed. And now Elena Martinez, the mistress he had manipulated and discarded, held the keys to exposing his entire web of deception. The revelation that Richard had been systematically hiding marital assets hit Sophia like a second earthquake. Just as she was trying to find her footing after the first, Elena's recordings, delivered via encrypted files the next morning, painted a picture of financial betrayal that made the emotional infidelity seem almost quaint by comparison. The Cayman accounts are established. Richard's voice crackled through Sophia's laptop speakers as she sat in Maria Santos's office. She'll never find those. The company restructuring will be complete by the time she files, and the stock options will be vested in the Shell Corporation. And if she gets suspicious, came the voice of David Chen, Richard's business partner and longtime friend. Sophia doesn't understand business. She never has. She'll take whatever settlement we offer and be grateful for it. Maria Santos paused the recording, her expression grim. This changes everything. Your husband has been planning this divorce long before you discovered the affair. These recordings suggest he's hidden potentially $20 to $30 million in offshore accounts. Sophia felt nauseous, and not from pregnancy hormones. How is that possible? I thought California was a community property state. It is, but only if we can prove the assets exist and were acquired during the marriage. Your husband has been very clever. He's made it look like his company's value decreased while secretly restructuring to hide the real profits. The next few hours were a blur of legal terminology and financial documents that made Sophia's head spin. Forensic accountants, asset recovery specialists, international banking lawyers. Maria assembled a team that cost more per hour than Sophia used to make in a month, back when she had her own career. The prenup limits your claim to $5 million plus the house, Maria explained. But if we can prove he used marital assets to fund the offshore accounts, we can challenge the agreement's validity. $5 million. It sounded like a fortune to most people, but Sophia knew it was a fraction of what Richard was worth. More importantly, it wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle their children had always known, or to provide the kind of security she would need as a single mother. That afternoon, while Marcus was at a friend's house, Sophia sat in their home office, Richard's domain, that she had rarely entered during their marriage, and began searching through files with the methodical desperation of a woman who had finally realized how thoroughly she had been played. The man she had thought was her partner had been treating her like an enemy for years, planning her financial destruction while she planned family vacations and birthday parties. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every time he had dismissed her questions about their finances, it had all been part of an elaborate strategy to ensure that when he was ready to discard her, she would have no power to fight back. Mommy, Marcus's voice from the doorway made her jump. Her 10-year-old son stood there looking uncertain, his soccer uniform still grass-stained from practice. Hey, sweetheart, how was practice? Okay, I guess. He hesitated. Mom, why is Dad sleeping in the guest room? And why was Elena from his office here yesterday? I saw her through the window when I got home from school. Sophia's heart clenched. Marcus was old enough to sense the tension, but young enough to still believe that his parents could fix whatever was wrong. How did you tell a child that their father was not the man they thought he was? Dad and I are having some problems right now, she said carefully. Sometimes married people go through difficult times. Are you getting divorced? The question was matter of fact, delivered with the brutal honesty of a child who had absorbed more than his parents realized. I don't know yet, honey, but whatever happens, you need to know that both Dad and I love you very much, and that will never change. Marcus nodded solemnly, then climbed into her lap or what was left of it with her growing belly. Will the baby still have a dad if you get divorced? Of course. Dad will always be your baby sister's father, just like he'll always be your father. But even as she said it, Sophia wondered what kind of father Richard would choose to be. Would he be the devoted dad who never missed a soccer game? Or would he be too busy with his new life to make time for the children from his old one? That evening, Richard came home to find Sophia waiting in the living room with a stack of documents spread across the coffee table. We need to talk about your assets, she said without preamble. Sophia, I've been thinking about what you said, and you're right. I've made terrible mistakes, but we can fix this. Stop. Her voice cut through his practiced charm like a blade. I know about the Cayman accounts. Richard, I know about the shell corporations and the restructured stock options. I have Elena's recordings. Richard's face went through a series of rapid changes. Surprise, anger, calculation. Then a cold mass that Sophia had never seen before. Those recordings were obtained illegally. They'll never hold up in court. Maybe not, but they'll give my forensic accountants a roadmap to find what you've hidden, and they'll show a jury exactly who you really are. A jury, Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sophia, you're not taking this to court. The media attention alone would destroy both of us. Think about Marcus. Think about what this would do to him. I am thinking about Marcus. I'm thinking about the fact that his father has been systematically stealing from his college fund to pay for his mistress's lifestyle. I haven't touched Marcus's education fund. The money all comes from the same place. Richard, our marriage, our assets, our children's future. You've been robbing from all of us to pay for your double life. Richard sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 45 years. What do you want? I want full disclosure of all assets. I want the offshore accounts returned to joint control, and I want you to agree to a fair division of everything we built together. And if I don't, then we go to court and I let Elena testify about everything she knows, including the part where you promised to leave me after the baby was born so you could marry her. Richard's eyes hardened. Elena is an unstable woman who has been stalking me for months. Her testimony would be worthless. Elena is a woman you've been financially supporting for 2 years while promising her a future you never intended to deliver. She's also pregnant with your child, which makes her a very sympathetic witness. They stared at each other across the expensive coffee table that Sophia had chosen 3 years ago, when they had redecorated the house for their fresh start. Now it felt like a negotiation table in a hostile corporate takeover. I need time to think, Richard said finally. You have 24 hours. After that, my lawyer files a motion for emergency spousal support and temporary asset freezing. After Richard left, Sophia sat alone in their living room, surrounded by the expensive artifacts of their life together. The custom furniture, the art collection, the Persian rugs, all of it had been purchased with money that Richard was now trying to hide from her. But the most expensive thing in the room wasn't any of the luxury items they had accumulated. It was the trust she had given him freely for 12 years, the faith that they were partners building something together. That trust, once shattered, could never be restored at any price. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Don't trust David Chen. He's been helping Richard hide money for years. I have more recordings if you need them. Elena. Sophia stared at the message, realizing that Richard's business partner, the man who had been a guest at their dinner table, who had been Marcus's honorary uncle, who had just last month offered to testify on her behalf, was actually part of the conspiracy to defraud her. The web of deception was wider than she had imagined, and Sophia was beginning to understand that she was fighting not just for her fair share of their assets, but for her very survival in a game where all the other players had been cheating from the beginning. Sophia woke up to her phone buzzing with notifications at 5:47 a.m. Bleary-eyed and 8 months pregnant, she reached for the device expecting messages from her lawyer or perhaps Grace checking in. Instead, she found her social media accounts flooded with tags, comments, and shares of an article that made her blood run cold. Exclusive tech mogul's wife, unstable and vindictive, says close source, screamed the headline on a prominent gossip blog. The article painted Sophia as a jealous, mentally unstable woman who was fabricating affairs and financial impropriety to destroy her innocent husband's reputation out of spite. But it was the photos that truly devastated her. Someone had taken pictures of her leaving her lawyer's office 2 days ago, catching her at her worst moment, hair unwashed, face blotchy from crying, wearing an oversized sweater that made her look frumpy and desperate. The caption read, Sophia Reynolds, 38, appears disheveled and erratic as she wages a bitter campaign against her successful husband. The article quoted anonymous, close friends, describing Sophia as increasingly paranoid and difficult throughout her pregnancy, impossible to live with, and prone to wild accusations. It suggested that Richard's only crime was working too hard to provide for his ungrateful family. She's always been jealous of Richard's success. One supposed friend was quoted as saying, now she's trying to destroy him because she can't handle not being the center of attention anymore. Sophia recognized Elena's handiwork immediately. Who else had access to flattering photos of Richard and inside information about their private life? Who else would benefit from portraying Sophia as an unfit mother and vindictive wife? By the time Grace arrived with coffee and damage control strategies, Sophia was trending on social media. Crazy wife and Connor Gold Digger Reynolds were both picking up steam, with strangers across the internet debating whether she was a victim or a manipulator. Don't read the comments, Grace warned, but it was too late. Sophia was already scrolling through hundreds of messages from people who had never met her, but felt qualified to judge her entire life based on carefully crafted propaganda. She looks like a psycho. One comment read, poor guy probably cheated just to get away from her. Classic gold digger behavior. She waited until he was successful, then tried to take everything, said another. The cruelest comments came from other women. As a mother, I can't imagine trying to destroy my children's father like this. She should be grateful for what she has instead of being so greedy. Each comment was like a physical blow, made worse by the fact that many of them were from accounts that appeared to be real women mothers, wives, professionals who should have understood the complexity of her situation, but instead chose to tear her down. This is a coordinated attack, Grace said, studying the pattern of posts and shares. Look at the timing. All these accounts shared the article within minutes of each other. Someone paid for this. The realization that Richard and Elena had weaponized social media against her added a new dimension to Sophia's humiliation. It wasn't enough to betray her privately. They were destroying her reputation publicly to make her look like an unreliable witness in their upcoming legal battles. At Marcus's school pickup that afternoon, Sophia felt the stares and whispered conversations of other parents. The private academy where she had volunteered for years, where she had organized fundraisers and served on committees, suddenly felt hostile. Former friends avoided eye contact or offered pitying smiles that somehow felt worse than outright rejection. Mrs. Reynolds, Marcus's teacher, Mrs. Hamilton, approached with the kind of careful expression people wore when they weren't sure if they were talking to a victim or a villain. Could we have a quick word? Sophia's heart sank. Is Marcus okay? He got into an altercation with another student today. Apparently, some of the children have been repeating things they've heard their parents saying about your family situation. The image of her 10-year-old son defending her honor on the playground while she was being eviscerated online made Sophia want to crawl into a hole. This was exactly what Richard had predicted would happen. If she fought back, their private pain would become public entertainment, and their children would pay the price. What did Marcus say? He told Tommy Morrison that his father was a liar and his mother wasn't crazy. Then he pushed Tommy down when Tommy said you were trying to steal his dad's money. Sophia closed her eyes, imagining her gentle, sensitive son being driven to violence to protect her. I'll talk to him. Mrs. Reynolds, I know this is a difficult time, but perhaps you might consider how the publicity is affecting Marcus. The children are very aware of what's being said online. The implicit criticism was clear. Sophia was putting her own vindictive agenda ahead of her child's well-being. It was the same narrative being pushed in the media, now being reinforced by people who had known her for years. That evening, as Sophia helped Marcus with homework while trying to ignore the continued barrage of social media notifications, her son looked up from his math worksheet and asked, "Mom, are you really trying to steal Dad's money?" The question, delivered with childlike directness, nearly broke her. "No, sweetheart. Dad and I are having a disagreement about what belongs to our family, but I would never steal from anyone." Then why are people saying you are? How do you explain to a 10-year-old that his father has spent months crafting a narrative designed to destroy his mother's credibility? How do you maintain your child's faith in his father while protecting yourself from that same man's attacks? Sometimes when adults are upset, they say things that aren't true. The important thing is that you know who I really am. Marcus studied her face with the intensity of a child trying to reconcile conflicting versions of reality. "I know you're good, Mom, even if other people don't." That night, Sophia found herself reading self-help books that Grace had recommended, trying to find strength in the stories of other women who had survived public humiliation and personal betrayal. Glennon Doyle's Untamed spoke to her about the courage required to leave a life that looked perfect from the outside but was destroying you from within. But reading about resilience and actually living it were two different things. When her phone buzzed at midnight with a notification that someone had created a fake social media account using her photos to post inflammatory political content, Sophia realized that the attacks were escalating beyond mere reputation management. Elena wasn't just trying to discredit her, she was trying to completely destroy any sympathy Sophia might receive from potential supporters. The next morning brought a new crisis. Sophia woke up with severe cramping and spotting, sending her into a panic about the baby's safety. Grace rushed her to the hospital, where Dr. Martinez ran tests and monitored the baby's heartbeat, while Sophia lay in the examination room trying not to think about the stress-induced complications that could result from the emotional warfare she was enduring. "Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated," Dr. Martinez said with concern. "Mrs. Reynolds, I need to ask, are you under unusual stress right now?" The question would have been laughable if it weren't so serious. Unusual stress didn't begin to cover having your entire life destroyed while carrying your husband's child. "I'm going through a divorce," Sophia said simply, not trusting herself to elaborate without breaking down. "I'm going to recommend modified bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. Your body is showing signs of extreme stress, and we need to protect both you and the baby." As Sophia lay in the hospital bed with monitors tracking her daughter's heartbeat, she felt the full weight of what Richard and Elena had done to her. They hadn't just betrayed her marriage and stolen her money, they had endangered her unborn child through their campaign of psychological warfare. But it was about to get worse. Grace appeared in the doorway with her laptop, her face grim. "Sophia, there's something else." Elena just posted a blog entry called "The Other Side of the Story." She's claiming that you knew about the affair all along and only objected when Richard tried to end it. Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the baby move restlessly inside her, as if sensing her mother's distress. Elena's version of events painted Sophia as a calculating woman who had been willing to share her husband as long as she maintained her lifestyle, only turning vindictive when faced with the prospect of losing her meal ticket. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, containing just enough truth to be believable, while completely inverting the reality of who was the victim and who was the predator. There's more, Grace continued reluctantly. She posted photos from inside your house, pictures of your bedroom, Marcus's room, personal family photos. She's claiming Richard gave her access because you were having a trial separation that you're now denying. The violation of having intimate details of her family's private life displayed for public consumption was staggering. Elena had turned their home into evidence for her false narrative, using Sophia's own possessions against her. As contractions began that evening, false labor brought on by stress, but terrifying nonetheless. Sophia realized that she was fighting for more than money or reputation. She was fighting for her daughter's life, for her son's future, and for the basic right to tell the truth about her own experience. But the truth, she was learning, was no match for a well-funded lie told by people who had nothing left to lose. At 32 weeks pregnant, as she felt her body trying to deliver her baby too early, Sophia made a promise to her unborn daughter she would not let the people who had betrayed them destroy their family's future. No matter what it cost her, the battle was just beginning, and Sophia Reynolds was finally ready to fight. The NICU at Cedars-Sinai was a world of beeping monitors, tiny incubators, and the kind of controlled chaos that comes with saving premature lives. Sophia's daughter, Emma Grace Reynolds, had arrived at 32 weeks weighing just 3 pounds 14 ounces, her tiny body fighting for every breath while lawyers argued over who would pay for her medical care. Sophia sat beside Emma's incubator, her hand pressed against the warm plastic barrier that separated her from her daughter, pumping breast milk while simultaneously texting with her legal team about Richard's latest maneuver. He had filed an emergency petition claiming that Sophia's erratic behavior and obvious mental instability made her an unfit parent, requesting immediate custody of Marcus while she was receiving psychiatric treatment. The psychiatric treatment was actually standard postpartum monitoring after a high-stress premature delivery, but Richard's lawyers had spun it as evidence of a complete mental breakdown. The timing was strategic and cruel. He was attacking her parental fitness while their daughter fought for her life. "You need to rest," Grace said, arriving with coffee and the kind of fierce protectiveness that had sustained their friendship through 2 decades. "I've organized a support network of women who've been through similar situations, with wealthy husbands trying to use the legal system to maintain control. I can't rest. If I'm not here advocating for Emma, Richard's people will find a way to claim I'm an absent mother. If I am here, they'll claim I'm neglecting Marcus. There's no winning move." Grace pulled up a chair beside the incubator, her trained therapist's eye cataloging the signs of trauma and exhaustion in her best friend. "Sophia, you're dealing with financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and now parental alienation. This is a textbook case of narcissistic abuse escalation. I don't care what it's called. I care that my daughter is fighting for her life while her father is fighting for her trust fund." Sionam. The harsh reality was that Emma's premature birth had complicated everything. The medical bills were mounting into hundreds of thousands of dollars, and Richard was already arguing that the cost should come out of Sophia's settlement rather than their shared assets. He was literally trying to make her pay for the stress-induced complications that his actions had caused. Dr. Patel, Emma's neonatologist, approached with the kind of measured optimism that NICU doctors perfected. "Emma's breathing is improving, but she'll likely need to stay here for at least 6 more weeks. Her lungs are developing well, but premature babies face ongoing challenges." "What kind of challenges?" Sophia asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Potential learning disabilities, developmental delays, ongoing respiratory issues. We won't know the full extent until she's older, but premature babies often require extensive therapeutic interventions. Shirinian, more medical bills, more long-term costs that Richard would undoubtedly try to saddle her with." Sophia could see his legal strategy forming paint, her as the crazy wife who endangered their unborn child through her vindictive legal actions. Then make her financially responsible for all the consequences. Marcus visited after school, his 10-year-old face solemn as he stared at his tiny sister through the incubator walls. "She's so small. Mom, Is she going to be okay? She's a fighter, just like her big brother. Dad says you made her come early because you were being mean to him. Sophia felt the words like a physical blow. Richard was already working to alienate Marcus, planting seeds of blame that would poison their son's relationship with her for years to come. That's not true, sweetheart. Sometimes babies come early, and it's nobody's fault. The doctors say Emma's getting stronger every day, but Marcus's expression remained troubled. Dad also says you're trying to take all his money so he can't take care of us anymore. Marcus, do you remember when we talked about how sometimes adults have disagreements about fairness? Dad and I disagree about what belongs to our family and what belongs to him. But no matter what happens, both of us will always take care of you and Emma. As Marcus pressed his small hand against the incubator, Sophia realized that Richard's most devastating weapon wasn't his hidden assets or media manipulation. It was their children's love and trust. He was systematically turning Marcus against her, while Emma lay helpless in the NICU, unable to form any bonds with the father who was already calculating how to minimize his financial responsibility for her care. That evening, Elena Martinez arrived at the hospital carrying flowers and wearing designer maternity clothes that Sophia recognized as having been purchased with marital funds. The audacity of it was breathtaking. The woman who had helped destroy Sophia's marriage was now performing maternal compassion for the cameras that mysteriously appeared whenever she was in public. I wanted to see how little Emma was doing, Elena said with practiced concern. Richard is so worried about her. Richard is worried about the medical bills, Sophia replied coldly. He's trying to have them deducted from my settlement. Maybe if you hadn't been so vindictive about the divorce, this wouldn't have happened. Maybe if you hadn't been sleeping with my husband, none of this would have happened. Elena's mask slipped slightly. Richard and I are planning to get married as soon as your divorce is final. I wanted you to hear it from me rather than reading about it online. The announcement, delivered while Sophia's premature daughter fought for life in the NICU, was Elena's final act of cruelty. She was claiming victory while Sophia was at her most vulnerable, ensuring that the news would hit her when she had no emotional reserves left to handle it. But Elena had made a crucial miscalculation. As she posed for photos outside the NICU, holding her own pregnant belly while expressing concern for poor little Emma, hospital security cameras captured something that would change everything. Mrs. Reynolds. A nurse approached with confusion written across her face. The woman who was just here, she gave us her name as Eleanor Reynolds and said she was Emma's stepmother. She tried to get access to Emma's medical records, claiming she needed them for insurance purposes. Sophia's exhaustion vanished, replaced by cold fury. Elena had just committed identity fraud and attempted to access confidential medical information. More importantly, she had done it on hospital security cameras while claiming to be married to a man who was still legally wed to someone else. Please call hospital security and ask them to preserve those recordings, Sophia said. And please document exactly what she said and what information she tried to access. Within hours, Sophia's lawyer had the security footage and Elena's signed statement claiming to be Elena Reynolds. It was the first major tactical error Elena had made, driven by her own arrogance and desperation to establish legitimacy as Richard's real partner. But the victory was short-lived. That night, as Sophia maintained her vigil beside Emma's incubator, her phone buzzed with a news alert that made her heart stop. Breaking Tech CEO Richard Reynolds announces engagement to personal assistant, denies paternity of hospitalized baby. The article, clearly planted by Richard's PR team, claimed that paternity tests had revealed Emma was not his biological child, suggesting that Sophia had been having an affair and was trying to trap him with another man's baby. It was a lie so outrageous that Sophia initially couldn't comprehend the level of cruelty required to fabricate it, but the damage was immediate and devastating. Social media exploded with renewed attacks on Sophia's character, now painting her not just as a vindictive gold digger, but as an adulteress trying to commit paternity fraud. The hospital staff began looking at her with suspicion, and she could feel the judgment in their carefully neutral expressions. As Emma's monitors beeped steadily through the night, Sophia realized that Richard had just made his most desperate move yet. By denying paternity of his own daughter while she lay fighting for life in the NICU, he had revealed the true depths of his moral bankruptcy. But he had also made a fatal error. Hospital records, genetic testing, and Emma's own DNA would prove his lie beyond any doubt. And when they did, every judge, jury, and journalist would see exactly what kind of man Richard Reynolds really was. The war for Emma's future and Sophia's survival was about to reach its climax. The paternity test results arrived on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide Sophia's life into before and after. As she sat in Maria Santos's office, holding the official documentation that proved beyond any scientific doubt that Richard Reynolds was Emma's biological father, she felt a grim satisfaction that was immediately overshadowed by horror at what the test revealed about Elena Martinez. "There's something else," Maria said, her voice carefully controlled. "The investigator found irregularities in Elena's background that you need to know about." The file Maria placed on the desk was thick with documents, photographs, and testimonies that painted a picture of deception so elaborate that Sophia initially couldn't process its scope. Elena Martinez wasn't just Richard's mistress, she was a professional con artist who had been systematically targeting wealthy married men for over a decade. "Her real name is Elena Rodriguez," Maria explained. "She's 34, not 29 as she claimed. She has no college degree, no legitimate work history, and a criminal record in 3 states for fraud and identity theft." The photographs spread across the desk showed Elena with different hair colors, different names, and different wealthy men. In each case, the pattern was identical. She would infiltrate their professional lives, seduce them into affairs, get pregnant, and then demand financial settlements to avoid public scandals. "The pregnancy," Sophia whispered, "fake. She's been using prosthetic belly inserts and hormone supplements to maintain the illusion. There is no baby. Sophia, there never was." The room spun around Sophia as she tried to comprehend the implications. Elena had spent 2 years pretending to be pregnant with Richard's child, using the phantom pregnancy to manipulate both him and Sophia, to justify her lifestyle, and to create leverage in the divorce proceedings. Richard didn't know, according to the recordings, he believed it was real. Elena is remarkably skilled at this type of long-term deception. She researched your family for months before applying for the assistant position, studying your marriage, your vulnerabilities, your husband's psychology. The investigator's report read like a thriller novel. Elena had previously targeted a real estate mogul in Miami, a pharmaceutical executive in Chicago, and a venture capitalist in Seattle. In each case, she had assumed a new identity, created an elaborate backstory, and executed a multi-year campaign designed to destroy marriages and extract maximum financial benefit. She targeted Richard specifically because of his net worth and his history of infidelity, Maria continued. She knew he would be susceptible to an affair, and she planned from the beginning to use the relationship to gain access to marital assets. Sophia thought about all the nights she had lain awake wondering what she had done wrong, what failures in their marriage had driven Richard to seek comfort elsewhere. The cruel irony was that Elena had chosen Richard precisely because he was the type of man who would cheat. She had exploited his weaknesses just as ruthlessly as she had exploited Sophia's trust. "There's more," Maria said reluctantly. "Elena has been documenting everything, recording conversations, photographing financial documents, copying computer files. She wasn't just planning to be Richard's mistress. She was planning to blackmail him." The scope of Elena's manipulation was staggering. She had positioned herself as both Richard's lover and his potential destroyer, creating a situation where he was completely under her control. The offshore accounts, the hidden assets, the shell corporations Elena had encouraged and facilitated all of it, creating a paper trail that would implicate Richard in financial crimes while giving her the evidence needed to destroy him if he ever tried to leave her. "She's been bleeding him dry for 2 years, and he didn't even realize it," Sophia said, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. The credit card charges, the apartment, the salary, it was all part of her plan to extract as much money as possible before disappearing. "And when you discovered the affair and filed for divorce, Elena realized her timeline had accelerated. She needed to pivot from long-term extraction to immediate damage control. That afternoon, armed with the evidence of Elena's true identity, Sophia confronted Richard in his attorney's office. He looked like he had aged 5 years in the past month, his usual polished appearance replaced by the haggard look of a man whose world was collapsing around him. "You need to see this," Sophia said, sliding the investigator's report across the conference table. As Richard read through the documents, his face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally a rage that Sophia had never seen before. "This can't be real," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Elena Rodriguez, born in Phoenix, Arizona, 3 aliases, 4 felony convictions, 12 documented victims over 15 years. She's not pregnant. Richard, she never was." Richard's hands shook as he held the photographs of Elena with other men, in other cities, executing identical schemes. The ultrasound appointments, the morning sickness, the prenatal vitamins, all fake. "She's been performing pregnancy for 2 years while systematically documenting everything you did to hide assets from me. She has recordings of you discussing tax evasion, bank fraud, and perjury. She has copies of every illegal financial maneuver you've made." The color drained from Richard's face. "Where is she now?" "Gone. She disappeared 3 days ago, along with $2 million from the accounts she had access to." Richard buried his face in his hands, the full scope of his situation finally becoming clear. He hadn't just betrayed his wife and endangered his family. He had been completely manipulated by a professional criminal who now possessed the evidence to destroy him legally and financially. "She played us both," Sophia said, feeling an unexpected surge of sympathy for the man who had caused her so much pain. "The difference is, I was an innocent victim. You were a willing participant in everything she suggested. Sophia, I know how this looks, but you have to believe me, I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was in love with her. I thought she loved me. You thought you were entitled to have both a wife and a mistress, and you were willing to commit financial crimes to pay for it. Elena didn't make you hide assets from me. Richard, she just made it easier." "What happens now?" Maria Santos leaned forward. "Now we deal with the fact that your husband has been systematically defrauding the IRS, committing bank fraud, and hiding assets from divorce proceedings. Elena may be gone, but the evidence of financial crimes remains." The next few hours were a blur of legal consultations, plea negotiations, and damage assessments. Richard's business was under federal investigation. His personal accounts were frozen, and his reputation was in ruins. The man who had once been worth $50 million was facing the possibility of bankruptcy and criminal prosecution. But for Sophia, the revelation of Elena's true nature brought an unexpected sense of closure. The affair hadn't happened because she was inadequate as a wife. It had happened because Richard was vulnerable to manipulation, and Elena was a skilled predator. "I need you to know," Richard said as they prepared to leave the lawyer's office, "that despite everything, despite all the lies and mistakes, what we had for 12 years was real. I did love you, Sophia. I still do." "I know," she replied, and for the first time in months, she actually believed it. But love without respect, without honesty, without fidelity, that's not enough to build a life on. That evening, as Sophia sat beside Emma's incubator in the NICU, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since the day she found Richard's phone. Her daughter was getting stronger every day. Her son was slowly beginning to trust her again. And the truth about Elena's deception had vindicated every instinct that had told her something was deeply wrong with their situation. Richard had been both perpetrator and victim, manipulator and manipulated. Elena had been the architect of their family's destruction, but she had built her scheme on a foundation of Richard's existing willingness to betray his marriage vows. The real question now was whether anything could be salvaged from the wreckage of their life together, and whether Richard was capable of the complete honesty that would be required to earn back even a fraction of the trust he had destroyed. 6 months after Elena's disappearance, Sophia sat in the cramped office of a Marina del Rey startup, wearing her first professional outfit in over a decade and trying to remember how to sell herself to strangers. The federal investigation into Richard's business had frozen most of their assets, leaving her with just enough money to rent a modest two-bedroom apartment and pay for basic necessities while the legal proceedings dragged on. "So you've been out of the workforce for 10 years?" asked Jennifer Kim, the young CEO of TechFlow Solutions, a company that developed apps for small businesses. "That's a significant gap." "I left my marketing position at Reynolds Tech when my son was born," Sophia explained, choosing her words carefully. "I've spent the last decade managing household operations, organizing charity events, and raising two children. Those skills translate directly to project management, client relations, and strategic planning." It was a pitch she had practiced dozens of times with Grace, trying to reframe her decade as a homemaker into relevant professional experience. The reality was that most of her former colleagues had advanced into senior positions while she had organized school fundraisers and managed domestic staff. "I'll be honest, Mrs. Reynolds," Jennifer continued, "your husband's legal troubles have been all over the news. We're a small company that can't afford any negative publicity." Sophia had expected this concern and prepared for it. "I understand your caution, but I want to be clear that I was never involved in any of the business practices currently under investigation. In fact, I was a victim of the financial deception that's now being prosecuted. Still, the association the association gives you an employee who understands the stakes of rebuilding from nothing. Someone who has every motivation to prove herself and contribute to your company's success." When after an hour of interviews and skills assessments, Sophia left with a tentative offer for a junior marketing position that paid less than she used to spend on Marcus's school tuition. But it was a start, and more importantly, it was independence. That evening, as she helped Marcus with homework in their small apartment, while Emma played in her bouncy seat, Sophia felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. The apartment was a far cry from their Malibu mansion, but it was theirs, paid for with money she had earned rather than money that came with strings attached. "Mom, are we poor now?" Marcus asked with the directness that 10-year-olds specialized in. "We're not poor, sweetheart. We're just learning to live differently. I like this place better," he said, surprising her. "It feels more like home." The transition hadn't been easy for Marcus. Leaving his private school for a public elementary school, moving from a mansion to an apartment, watching his father's fall from grace play out in the media, it had been traumatic for a child who had known only privilege and stability. But there had been unexpected benefits too. Without nannies and housekeepers, Marcus had become more self-reliant and helpful. Without the pressure of maintaining appearances in their wealthy social circle, he seemed more relaxed and authentic. And without the constant tension of his parents' failing marriage, he was sleeping better and smiling more often. "I've been thinking about starting something of my own," Sophia told Grace during one of their weekly coffee meetings. "An app that helps women navigate divorce and financial abuse. Something that would have helped me when I was trying to figure out what Richard was hiding." Grace's eyes lit up with excitement. "That's brilliant. You have firsthand experience with exactly the kind of manipulation tactics that wealthy spouses use to hide assets. I'm calling it Truth Teller. It would help women document suspicious financial activity, connect them with forensic accountants and lawyers who specialize in high-asset divorces, and provide a support network of other women who've been through similar situations." Over the next several months, Sophia threw herself into developing the app with the same intensity she had once devoted to charity galas and school committees. Working late into the night after the children were asleep, she taught herself basic coding, researched legal requirements, and interviewed dozens of divorced women about their experiences with financial abuse. The support group that Grace had organized became her informal focus group, providing feedback on features and sharing stories that informed the app's development. These women doctors, lawyers, teachers, executives had all been systematically deceived by spouses who used their financial sophistication to maintain control and avoid fair settlements. The hardest part isn't proving that money is missing, explained Patricia, a surgeon whose psychiatrist husband had hidden assets in overseas accounts. It's convincing people that someone who seems so respectable could be capable of such calculated deception. That insight became the cornerstone of Truth Teller's design, creating a platform where women could anonymously document suspicious behavior, access educational resources about financial manipulation, and connect with professionals who understood the complexity of high-asset divorces. 6 months later, Sophia found herself pitching Truth Teller to a panel of investors in a downtown high-rise, wearing a suit that Grace had helped her pick out and carrying a presentation that represented hundreds of hours of work. The market for divorce-related services is worth over $20 billion annually. Sophia explained to the mostly male panel, but existing resources focus primarily on legal procedures rather than the financial detective work that's required when one spouse has been systematically hiding assets. The questions were tough, sometimes condescending, and occasionally hostile. Several investors seemed more interested in her personal story than her business model, treating her like a curiosity rather than a serious entrepreneur. But one investor, Rebecca Martinez, no relation to Elena Rodriguez, as Sophia had nervously confirmed, saw the potential immediately. "This addresses a real gap in the market," Rebecca said after the other investors had left. "I've seen too many smart, capable women get financially destroyed in divorces because they didn't know how to protect themselves from sophisticated manipulation." The investment offer was modest enough to properly develop and launch the app, but not enough to make Sophia wealthy. It was, however, enough to prove that she could create something valuable from the wreckage of her old life. 8 months after leaving the startup job, Sophia found herself featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine as divorced mom-turned-tech CEO. The article chronicled her journey from betrayed housewife to successful business owner, inspiring other women who were rebuilding their lives after devastating personal losses. "The best revenge," Sophia was quoted as saying, "is building something better than what you lost." But even as Truth Teller gained users and recognition, Sophia knew that her success came with a price. Richard's legal troubles had escalated to criminal charges, and his company had collapsed under the weight of federal scrutiny. The man who had once been worth $50 million was now facing bankruptcy and possible prison time. Marcus struggled with seeing his father's downfall play out so publicly. Richard's visits had become irregular as he dealt with legal proceedings, and when he did see the children, he was often distracted and depressed. "Is Dad going to jail?" Marcus asked one evening as they walked along the beach near their apartment. "I don't know, sweetheart. That will be decided by a judge and jury. Do you want him to go to jail?" It was a question Sophia had asked herself many times. Richard had betrayed their marriage, endangered their family's financial security, and committed crimes that had real victims. But he was also the father of her children, and his complete downfall wouldn't undo the damage that had already been done. "I want him to be held accountable for the choices he made," she said carefully. "But more than that, I want him to become someone worthy of being your father again." That night, as Sophia worked on Truth Teller's latest update, while Emma slept in her crib and Marcus did homework at the kitchen table, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. The woman who had once defined herself through her husband's success had become someone who created her own definition of achievement. The apartment was small, their budget was tight, and the future was uncertain. But for the first time in years, Sophia Reynolds was exactly who she wanted to be: a mother, an entrepreneur, and a woman who had survived the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger than before. 2 years after the crystal vase shattered against the marble wall of their Malibu mansion, Sophia sat in a downtown courthouse listening to a federal judge sentence Richard Reynolds to 18 months in prison for tax evasion and bank fraud. The man who had once graced magazine covers as a visionary tech leader now stood in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller and older than she remembered. The defendant engaged in a systematic campaign to defraud the United States government and deprive his spouse of marital assets, Judge Patricia Wilson stated. While the court acknowledges that Mr. Reynolds was manipulated by Elena Rodriguez, his choices to hide income and lie under oath were his own. Elena Rodriguez had never been found. Despite international warrants and a massive FBI investigation, she had vanished with her stolen millions, leaving behind only the wreckage of the lives she had destroyed. Interpol suspected she was operating under a new identity in South America, but for practical purposes, she had simply evaporated. Richard's sentencing brought closure to a legal saga that had consumed 3 years of Sophia's life. The federal investigation had recovered most of the hidden assets, resulting in a final divorce settlement of $32 million, more than Sophia had ever expected to receive, but a fraction of what the family would have been worth if Richard hadn't gambled everything on his affair with a con artist. "How do you feel?" asked the reporter from Forbes, who had been following Sophia's story for a feature on women who had turned personal disasters into business success. "Justice isn't just about punishment," Sophia replied, watching Richard being led away in handcuffs. "It's about accountability, consequences, and the opportunity to rebuild something better from what was destroyed." Truth Teller had grown into a multi-million-dollar company with over 100,000 users across North America. The app had helped dozens of women uncover hidden assets, documented patterns of financial abuse, and connected users with a network of attorneys, accountants, and therapists who specialized in high-conflict divorces. Sophia's success had come at the perfect time. Marcus, now 13, was thriving in his new public school and had developed a passion for coding that reminded Sophia of Richard's early entrepreneurial spirit. Emma, 2 years old and showing no lasting effects from her premature birth, was walking, talking, and displaying the kind of fearless curiosity that suggested she would never let anyone define her limitations. "Mom, are you coming to my science fair presentation?" Marcus asked as they left the courthouse. His project on data security had won first place in his school's competition, and he had been invited to present at the regional level. "I wouldn't miss it," Sophia replied, feeling a pride that had nothing to do with wealth or status and everything to do with watching her son become his own person. The drive back to their new house, a modest 4-bedroom in Manhattan Beach that Sophia had purchased with her first year's profits from Truth Teller, gave her time to reflect on how completely her definition of success had changed. The house was a fraction of the size of their former mansion, but it was filled with laughter, creativity, and the kind of authentic happiness that money couldn't buy. That evening, as Sophia tucked Emma into bed and helped Marcus with homework that was more advanced than anything she had studied in college, she felt a contentment that had eluded her during all the years of luxury and privilege. "Mommy, is Daddy coming to my birthday party?" Emma asked with the innocent directness of a 2-year-old who didn't understand why her father only appeared on supervised visits every other weekend. "Daddy is in a place where he has to stay for a while," Sophia explained gently. "But he loves you very much, and when he comes home, he'll want to celebrate your birthday with you." It was a conversation she had dreaded, but knew was inevitable. How do you explain to a toddler that their father is in prison? How do you maintain their relationship with someone who had made such destructive choices? Richard's incarceration had forced him into a kind of sobriety that years of therapy might not have achieved. Without the distractions of wealth, business pressures, and enabling relationships, he had been forced to confront the reality of what his choices had cost his family. His letters from prison were different from anything he had written before. Honest, remorseful, and focused entirely on understanding how to become a better father and person. For the first time in their relationship, Richard was taking full responsibility for his actions without trying to justify, minimize, or blame others. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," he had written in his most recent letter, "but I want you to know that every day in here, I think about the man I want to be when I get out. Not for my sake, but for Marcus and Emma. They deserve a father who is worthy of their love." Sophia had been surprised to find that she felt no satisfaction in Richard's downfall. The man she had once loved was paying a heavy price for his choices, but his punishment didn't undo the damage or erase the years of deception. What mattered now was whether he could emerge from prison as someone capable of being a positive presence in their children's lives. 6 months later, Sophia stood on a stage at the Women's Entrepreneurship Summit in San Francisco, delivering a keynote speech about resilience, reinvention, and the unexpected gifts that could emerge from life's greatest catastrophes. 3 years ago, I was a woman who defined herself entirely through her relationships with others. She told the audience of 500 women entrepreneurs. I was Richard's wife, Marcus's mother, the perfect hostess, the devoted supporter of everyone else's dreams. When those relationships were threatened, I felt like I was disappearing. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word of a story that resonated with their own experiences of loss, betrayal, and transformation. The affair, the divorce, the financial abuse, all of it felt like the end of my world. And in many ways it was. But sometimes the end of one world is the beginning of a better one. She talked about the night she discovered Richard's infidelity, about Elena's manipulation, about sitting in the NICU with Emma while fighting for her family's survival. But she also talked about the unexpected strength she had discovered, the community of women who had supported her, and the business that had emerged from her determination to help others avoid the traps she had fallen into. Truth Teller exists because I needed it, and it didn't exist yet, she explained. Sometimes the best businesses come from solving your own problems and then realizing that millions of other people have the same problems. The speech ended with thunderous applause and a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Afterward, dozens of women approached her with their own stories of betrayal, financial abuse, and the challenge of rebuilding their lives from scratch. "You gave me hope," said one woman whose husband had hidden assets in cryptocurrency accounts. "I thought I was the only one who had been so completely fooled." "You're not alone," Sophia replied. The words she had longed to hear 3 years earlier when she felt like the only woman in the world who had been so thoroughly deceived by someone she trusted. The flight home to Los Angeles gave Sophia time to process how far she had traveled, both literally and metaphorically, from the broken woman who had once sat alone in a Malibu mansion, wondering how her perfect life had turned into a nightmare. Marcus met her at the airport, now tall enough to help with her luggage and mature enough to manage Emma's car seat while Sophia loaded their bags. At 13, he had become her partner in many ways, helping with his sister and offering insights that sometimes surprised her with their wisdom. "How was your speech?" he asked as they drove through the familiar streets of Manhattan Beach. "Good. I talked about our story, about how we went from the big house to our house, and how sometimes losing everything helps you figure out what actually matters." "Do you miss the big house?" It was a question Marcus had asked before, usually when he was feeling the social pressure of having friends whose families still lived the wealthy lifestyle he had once known. "I miss feeling secure," Sophia answered honestly. "I miss not worrying about money or what people thought of us. But I don't miss feeling like my whole life depended on someone else's choices." "I'm proud of you, Mom," Marcus said suddenly. "My friends' moms always talk about their husbands' jobs or their houses or their cars, but you built something yourself. That's way cooler." That evening, as Sophia sat in her home office working on Truth Teller's expansion into international markets, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The app now served women in 12 countries, had partnerships with legal aid organizations, and had been credited with helping users recover over $50 million in hidden marital assets. More importantly, Truth Teller had become a community where women could share their experiences without judgment, find resources for rebuilding their lives, and support each other through the darkest periods of betrayal and recovery. Success isn't about reaching some predetermined destination, Sophia had written in her upcoming book, Shattered: A Woman's Guide to Rebuilding After Betrayal. It's about becoming someone you respect while building something that matters. Emma's third birthday party was everything a little girl could want: princess decorations, a unicorn cake, and a backyard full of friends from her preschool. Sophia watched her daughter blow out candles with the pure joy that only children could muster, feeling a contentment that had taken years to achieve. The guest list was carefully curated, mostly other parents from Emma's school, a few neighbors, and the extended family that Sophia had built from friends who had become closer than relatives. Grace was there with her own children. Maria Santos had brought her granddaughter, and several women from Sophia's support group had become genuine friends whose children played together regularly. Richard had been released from prison 6 months earlier and was slowly rebuilding his relationship with the children through supervised visits and family therapy. He wasn't at the party. Sophia wasn't ready for that level of integration, but he had sent a thoughtful gift and a card that showed he was learning to respect boundaries while expressing his love for Emma. Speech called out Rebecca Martinez, the investor who had believed in Truth Teller when it was just an idea born from personal trauma. Sophia raised her glass of sparkling cider, looking out at the faces of people who had supported her through the hardest period of her life. 3 years ago, I thought my world was ending. Today, I'm celebrating my daughter's birthday in a home I bought with money I earned, surrounded by friends I chose, living a life I built from scratch. The toast was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected guest. Grace Chen approached with an expression that Sophia had never seen before: guilty, excited, and nervous all at once. "Sophia, there's something I need to tell you," Grace said, pulling her aside while the party continued around them. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." "What is it?" Grace pulled out her phone and showed Sophia a contract that made her blood run cold. "HarperCollins. They offered me a book deal about your story. The Reynolds Scandal, an inside look at millionaire marriage betrayal." Sophia stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "You're writing a book about me. Not about you exactly, about the psychology of financial abuse, using your case as a primary example. Sophia, your story could help millions of women who are going through similar situations. My story, Grace. You were my therapist. Everything I told you was confidential. Technically, our conversations weren't in a clinical setting. Technically, Sophia's voice rose, causing several party guests to turn in their direction. Grace, you were my best friend. I trusted you with everything. That's exactly why this book will be so powerful. I have insights that no outside observer could have. I know how you really felt, what you were really thinking during the worst moments. The betrayal hit Sophia like a physical blow. Grace had been her anchor during the storm, the one person she had trusted completely when everyone else seemed to be choosing sides or judging her choices. To discover that Grace had been secretly documenting their conversations for her own professional gain felt like the ultimate violation. The advance was $2 million. "Sophia, I'm going to donate half to domestic violence organizations and use the rest to expand my practice to help more women like you." "Women like me?" Sophia's voice was dangerously quiet. "You mean women whose best friends sell their trauma for profit?" Grace's face crumpled. "It's not like that. I genuinely want to help by exploiting my pain, by turning the worst period of my life into your career advancement." The conversation was drawing attention from other party guests, and Sophia realized that Emma's birthday celebration was being overshadowed by yet another betrayal from someone she had trusted completely. "We'll discuss this later," Sophia said firmly. "This is my daughter's party, and I won't let your choices ruin it." But the damage was done. As Grace left early with mumbled apologies, Sophia struggled to maintain her composure while rage and hurt battled inside her. The woman who had held her hand through the darkest nights, who had organized support groups and provided free therapy, who had been more like a sister than a friend, she had been secretly planning to profit from Sophia's suffering all along. As the party wound down and Emma napped surrounded by new toys, Sophia sat on her back porch trying to process this latest revelation. She had rebuilt her life, found success, created security for her children, and learned to trust again. Now she had to confront the reality that even her closest relationships might be built on hidden agendas and selfish motivations. "Mrs. Reynolds." A voice from her side yard made her look up. A woman in her 60s stood by the gate, elegantly dressed and somehow familiar, despite Sophia being certain they had never met. "Can I help you?" "My name is Catherine Matthews," the woman said, approaching with the careful steps of someone who wasn't sure of her welcome. "I think we need to talk about Richard." Something in the woman's voice made Sophia's stomach drop. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" Catherine smiled sadly. We've never met, but we have more in common than you might think. You see, Mrs. Reynolds, I'm Richard's first wife. The words hit Sophia like lightning. Richard's first wife was supposed to be dead killed in a car accident years before Sophia met him. It was a tragedy he had mentioned only briefly, always with the appropriate sadness of a man who had lost his first love too young. That's impossible, Sophia whispered. Richard's first wife died in a car accident. That's what he told you, isn't it? Catherine's expression was knowing and bitter. Just like he told me that his college girlfriend died of cancer, and like he probably told Elena that you were mentally unstable and had never really loved him. Sophia sank into her patio chair as the implications crashed over her. If Catherine was alive, then Richard's entire personal history was a fabrication. The grieving widower narrative that had made him seem wounded and romantic. The tragic backstory that had explained his emotional unavailability, all of it, was lies designed to manipulate her sympathy and lower her defenses. Richard Reynolds doesn't have first wives, Catherine continued. He has discarded wives, women who served their purpose until he found someone younger, wealthier, or more useful. You were never his second marriage. Sophia, you were just the latest in a series. How many? Sophia's voice was barely audible. That I know of 4, possibly 5. Richard is very good at making his previous wives disappear from his official narrative. Divorce records sealed, mutual agreements not to discuss the marriage, sometimes payoffs to ensure silence. Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. I've been tracking Richard's marriages for years, trying to warn his new wives before they get too deeply involved. I was too late to help you before the wedding, but I hoped I might be able to help with the divorce proceedings. The folder contained marriage certificates, divorce records, photographs, and testimonies from other women who had been married to Richard Reynolds under various names and circumstances. Each story followed a similar pattern: intense courtship, quick marriage, gradual financial control, systematic isolation from friends and family, and eventually replacement with a younger woman. Elena wasn't his first affair, Catherine explained. She was just the first one who turned out to be smarter and more dangerous than he was. Sophia stared at a photograph of Richard from 15 years earlier, standing beside a young blonde woman at what was clearly a wedding ceremony. The woman looked radiant and in love, completely unaware that she was marrying a man who collected wives like trophies and discarded them when they were no longer useful. Why are you telling me this now? Sophia asked. Because Richard is getting out of prison soon, and he's already started the process of reinventing himself again. New business contacts, new image consultants, new strategies for rebuilding his wealth and reputation. I wanted you to know what you're really dealing with. Catherine handed her a business card. I run a support network for Richard's former wives. We help each other navigate his manipulation tactics, share information about his latest schemes, and provide emotional support for dealing with the trauma of being systematically deceived by someone we trusted. As Catherine left, Sophia sat holding the folder that contained evidence of her husband's true nature. The man she had loved, divorced, forgiven, and cautiously begun to co-parent with was not just a cheater or a financial criminal. He was a serial manipulator who had been perfecting his techniques on vulnerable women for decades. Emma woke from her nap and toddled outside, still wearing her princess dress and carrying her favorite stuffed unicorn. Mommy, who was that lady? Just someone with information about Daddy, Sophia said, pulling her daughter onto her lap. Is Daddy coming to live with us again? No, sweetheart. Daddy will always be your daddy, but he won't be living with us. As the sun set over Manhattan Beach, Sophia realized that her story was far from over. Richard's prison sentence had been just a temporary interruption in a pattern of behavior that stretched back decades. His apparent transformation, his letters of remorse, his promises to be a better father, all of it might be just another performance designed to regain access to his children and position himself for his next victim. The woman who had once believed in fairy tale endings now understood that some stories don't have neat conclusions. Instead, They have new chapters that reveal deeper truths about the characters and force the heroine to make increasingly difficult choices about how much she's willing to sacrifice to protect the people she loves. Emma fell asleep in Sophia's arms as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and new decisions about how to navigate a world where even the people closest to her might be harboring secret agendas. But tonight, holding her daughter close and surrounded by the life she had built from the wreckage of her marriage, Sophia Reynolds knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was stronger than any betrayal, smarter than any manipulation, and determined to protect her children from the predators who wore the masks of love. The story of Richard Reynolds and his victims was far from over. But Sophia's story, the story of a woman who had transformed trauma into triumph, betrayal into business success, and isolation into community, that story was just beginning. As Emma's breathing deepened into sleep, Sophia's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm Richard's third wife. Catherine gave me your number. We need to meet." The revelation that there were more victims, more stories, more women who had been systematically deceived by the same man, confirmed what Sophia had begun to suspect. Her personal nightmare was part of a much larger pattern of predatory behavior that had been hidden for decades. But it also meant that she wasn't alone in understanding the true nature of Richard Reynolds. And sometimes, the best weapon against a manipulator was the united voices of the women he had underestimated, overlooked, and assumed would remain silent about their experiences. Sophia looked down at her sleeping daughter and made a silent promise Emma would grow up knowing how to recognize manipulation, how to value her own worth, and how to build relationships based on honesty rather than control. The next chapter of their story was about to begin, and this time, Sophia would be writing it herself. Epilogue: 5 years later, Sophia Reynolds stood before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, testifying about the need for stronger laws protecting victims of financial abuse in high-asset divorces. Truth Teller had grown into an international platform serving over 500,000 women, and Sophia's advocacy work had made her a recognized expert on the intersection of domestic abuse and financial crime. "Senators, emotional manipulation and financial abuse don't respect economic boundaries," she testified. "In fact, wealthy abusers often have more sophisticated tools for hiding assets, manipulating legal proceedings, and using their resources to silence their victims." In the gallery, Marcus, now 18 and heading to MIT on a full scholarship for computer science, watched his mother with pride. Emma, 8 years old and already showing signs of her mother's fierce independence, sat beside him taking notes in a journal where she recorded important grown-up things. Richard had been released from prison 3 years earlier and had attempted to rebuild his relationship with his children through supervised visits and family therapy. However, the revelation of his multiple previous marriages and the testimony of his other victims had limited his access and ended any possibility of reconciliation with Sophia. He had tried to start new businesses, pursue new relationships, and rebuild his reputation. But the connected network of his former wives and the permanent record of his criminal conviction made it impossible for him to operate with his previous level of deception. Elena Rodriguez had never been found, but similar cons had been reported in Argentina and Uruguay, suggesting she had moved her operations to South America, where extradition would be more difficult. Grace Chen had published her book, which became a bestseller, but also ended her friendship with Sophia permanently. The book had helped many women recognize signs of financial abuse, but the personal cost of its creation had destroyed the trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship. As Sophia concluded her testimony and fielded questions from the senators, she reflected on the long journey from victim to advocate, from isolated housewife to successful entrepreneur and social activist. The crystal vase that Richard had thrown in anger 5 years earlier had shattered into 1,000 pieces that could never be reassembled. But from those fragments, Sophia had built something entirely new, a life based on truth, resilience, and the understanding that sometimes the most beautiful creations emerge from the wreckage of what came before. Her story had become bigger than her personal experience of betrayal and recovery. It had become a roadmap for other women navigating similar challenges, a platform for changing laws and social attitudes, and a testament to the power of transforming personal pain into collective action. As they left the Capitol building, Emma took her mother's hand and asked, "Mom, when I grow up, will I be as brave as you?" "You'll be braver," Sophia replied, knowing it was true, "because you'll grow up knowing that your worth isn't determined by anyone else, and that you never have to accept less than you deserve." The Reynolds family scandal had ended, but the Reynolds legacy of resilience, truth-telling, and female empowerment was just beginning. And somewhere in the world, another woman was discovering her husband's betrayal, feeling alone and powerless, and about to learn that she was neither. For her, Sophia's story would be not an ending, but a beginning.